Do you remember what it felt like to be a little kid at Christmas time? There's nothing quite like the anticipation of Christmas morning. But the holiday can lose its wonder as we wake up to the many hard things going on in our lives and in the world. The loss we feel over our childhood experience points to a deeper longing inside all of us for everything sad to be undone and for us to live together with God in perfect joy. This fall, Rooted is releasing a new Advent devotional for teenagers with New Growth Press called Longing for Christmas. We look at 25 promises God made and fulfilled in the coming of Jesus. As we explore the way God has kept his promises, teenagers will be encouraged that all of the longing they feel for a better world and for things to be made right will be fully met in Jesus Christ.
You are listening to the Asian American Youth Ministry Roundtable, part of the Rooted family of podcasts, advancing gospel-centered youth ministry for those serving in Asian American contexts and their students, equipping those serving to more effectively disciple students, and empowering families and churches to minister to Asian American youth more faithfully.
All right. Hey, welcome and hello to everybody to the Rooted Asian American Youth Ministry Roundtable. I'm going to be your host today, Justin, and we are joyful that you can tune in and listen to us today. Today on our Roundtable podcast, we're excited to have Dorothy. Say what's up, Dorothy.
What's up, Dorothy?
Okay.
What's up? Sorry.
And then we also got Huey as one of our another guest.
What's going on? Good to be here. Thanks for hosting, Justin.
Yeah, man. This is kind of one without Uncle Danny. So if we go off the rails, hope you enjoy this.
He's letting us do our thing.
For real. All right. So today, the three of us, we're talking about Asian American youth ministry over the years, trends, challenges, and opportunities. And so I figured since we're pretty new to this podcast, I'm going to start with some intros. And so, Dorothy, who are you? Where are you serving? And then when did you start serving? The unofficial date and then the official date. Let's go with that.
Oh, okay.
Ooh,
who am I? I am Dorothy Lau, and I am the youth director at the Chinese Bible Church of Maryland in Rockville, Maryland. And I have been serving here both, I guess, unofficially and officially since November 2018. So I am coming up on being at this church for 6 years, but I was prior serving for 3 or 4 years as the assistant to the youth pastor. And then now I am basically the youth pastor.
Nice. So that's, if my math's correct, that's like 28 years or something like that.
Probably docked from my lifeline. Yes. So it looks like it has aged on my face, maybe.
Dude, youth ministry does that to you. That's how we do numbers.
Yeah, the white hairs in your
head. Huey, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Huey, and I'm currently serving in Centerville, Virginia, which is about 25 minutes west of DC. And I've been in this particular church going on my 11th year now. But overall, I started youth ministry back in 2004. I was right out of college, and I went to seminary, and that's when I started kind of interning in a youth ministry context. So in and out of youth ministry, more in than out for about 20 years now.
Man,
so
that's like 1,000 years pretty much in our worlds.
Thanks for making me feel old, man.
No, man, you look brand new. I'm Justin. I'm here in Houston, Texas, where I think it was like 98 degrees today, man. Still, it's nuts. Serving at Chinese Baptist Church as the youth pastor there. I was on staff since 2008. And like Huey started right at the beginning of college in about 2000. So I think this is why we kind of went to this topic, because I think between the three of us, we've seen a lot in youth ministry. I think again, you'll have to fact check me. I think the stat was post-COVID, the average tenure of a youth pastor was like 10 months or something like that. Did you see that?
Yeah.
And so people are like, how long have you been there? And so the question I get, I don't know about the two of you guys, is what kind of changes have we seen over our span of youth ministry? And so that's kind of what we're trying to hit. And so we got 3 kind of topics. And so we'll just shoot them and just kind of see where we're at. Right. So with the trends, I'm going to throw this one to Dorothy first. So as trends go, what are some major cultural shifts you've seen influence kind of the Asian American youth ministry in the recent decades?
In general, I've been in youth ministry since 2009, which was like shortly after high school. And it started as being like a VBS helper or camp counselor. And one big thing, this is more trivial perhaps, but one
Okay.
big thing I've seen different from youth ministry in the last 15, 20 years compared to now is there's a lot fewer sports ministries because there are not as many athletic students in our midst. And if they are in athletics, they're doing like travel or club or private
Mm.
organized sports rather than seeing like church sports ministry as an actual ministry. They're more diving into competitiveness. So that's one trend that I see in youth ministry is we have far fewer athletic or sports-based activities. And when we do have them, kids aren't necessarily coming out to them. So
Mm.
that's one thing that I'll just put out there. Yeah. But they do love board games apparently because there's a certain nostalgia that comes from it. But also, respectfully, I think the kids make up their own rules and then they they just want to keep winning against each other, but not by any rules that are outlined in the board games themselves.
So,
So
so you're saying board games are just universal, no matter when, where in the world of youth
yeah,
ministry?
like
Okay,
kids will do
so
the puzzles and they'll do board games, but they're not necessarily as into sports unless you're like at least 5'7".
okay, what board games are you guys playing with right now? I think that's a
So
at this current moment.
at this current moment, so we only have about like 10 board games. We just have a bin that's labeled board
Oh,
games. And in there we have the classics of like bananagrams. For some reason we have categories, even though most kids don't know how to play it. Apples to apples, card games, Uno, which everyone cheats, honestly.
sure.
And then Sushi Go, I think is
Okay.
another one.
Okay.
But I just added a newer one, which is called Cards Christians Like. And it's kind of a concept
Did
that's
you make that on your own? Did you make that up?
no, I mean, thank you. They
Trademark.
regard me so highly, but no, it's it was featured on Kickstarter, and then they also have their own website where you can purchase the game itself and mini packs too, and start
Okay.
expansion packs. But the whole premise is basically it's a blend, a cleaner Christian culture blend of like Cards Against Humanity meets Apples to Apples, but in a Christian context. So I was playing that with my students and with my volunteers recently as kind of like a bonding and icebreaker game, which
Sure.
it's just really funny to see what kind of responses come up. So it's something to look into and add to your
Okay.
bin.
Okay. Huey, what games did y'all start with when you first played were just jumped into youth ministry and then did that morph?
Bro, when I started youth ministry, we were doing like Twister. You guys remember the Twister? We're playing,
Twister.
yeah.
Man, we outlawed that game. There's
Yeah.
too many body parts everywhere.
Yeah, and I think like the last game I remember playing with our youth group was like Monopoly Deal. But that doesn't mean that our kids are not playing. It's just I'm not familiar. There's too many games, too
True.
many. Yeah, it's a crazy world out there, man.
Yeah, okay.
I don't remember anything.
I mean, dodgeballs are like the squishy ones and not the real ones. So I knew that culture took a tank when that happened.
Yeah, I mean, this could be a podcast in its own. Just kind of the trajectory history of youth group games in the Asian American church. We'll table this one. This will be a good one. We'll keep this one.
And we'll make
But
sure that Danny's part of that convo.
for real, he played with rocks back then. Just kidding. Just kidding. All right.
For dodgeball.
Okay, so with this question, right? Major cultural shifts. Do y'all remember, like, was there anything that happened in history timeline that you guys could think of that kind of changed even just how we did ministry? That you guys that felt like it was a huge seismic shift in your youth group?
Well, I mean, I think one thing that comes to mind is just in the wider culture, kind of the Asian American pop culture just kind of getting on the map.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one.
When was that for you guys?
Oh,
And what
man.
set it off?
I don't quite remember what set it off, but I remember like names like Psy and that Gangnam Style dance, right?
Yeah.
That was like
or even,
2012. Yeah.
2012. Yeah.
recently, like with BTS, things like that. I feel like just Asian American culture just kind of getting on the map more prominently, even like Asian food. there's just more
Mhm.
stuff like with social media now, and
Sure.
there's so many content and influencers, all of that just kind of coming forward. I think one shift that I feel like I see and I feel more often is church necessarily isn't the place where our students find their community,
Mm.
right? Like I remember when I was growing up, or even when I started youth ministry, like we felt our Asianness, right? And we struggled with belonging in the wider culture. We didn't quite belong in the majority culture, but we also kind of didn't belong in our home with our families, with our parents. So church kind of and youth ministry was where we flocked to. That's where we felt like we were known and we were seen, and we didn't have to pretend, and there was a safety there. But what I feel more often lately is church necessarily isn't the place. I mean, for me, like the church was like my safety place.
Yeah.
And that's where my friends were. I mean, I had friends in schools and whatever, but my true friends, the people that knew me deeply, they were my church people. They felt like family. But now I feel like we've kind of lost that sense of community. I know for a fact that everyone, whether you're Asian or not, everyone wants and needs to belong, right? That the idea of being belonging and the idea of community is there for everybody, because that's just biblical and that's theological. So we're hardwired for that, and yet church really isn't the place anymore.
Interesting.
Yeah, our church just hired a youth pastor, and one of the things that he noticed was once our youth ministry or youth service is done, everyone just scatters. Like that was one of his first impressions about our church was, no one really stays and lingers.
Yeah.
Because,
And you guys grew up with that, huh?
yeah, well, actually, I did for sure. Yeah, I don't know about you, Dorothy or Justin.
Yeah,
No,
for sure. I
we
resonate with
did.
that. Yeah.
I mean, we did for sure. I mean, again, I grew up so my youth group was back in the 90s. So, which is a phenomena, I guess, when you talk about cultural shifts. We didn't have a lot of stuff to do, right? I mean, we would stay at church, eat lunch at church, and then just play ball till like 6 p.m. And then our parents were like, hey, come home, do homework. And then that was about it. Because there's no gaming back then. We would have to lug our literal computers with our monitors and stuff. And so, like most of our downtime was actually with church folks. So that's kind of what it is. We don't see a lot of kids hanging around anymore. I mean, that's where we're at right now. I mean, another huge major cultural thing that probably can spend another podcast on, just the effects of COVID. I think that's massive to do. And then I would say even within the last, 10, 15 years, there's been some major court cases. I feel like that have really shifted the the identity worldviews of a lot of students. And so those are just some things to probably keep on the docket that we could probably think through in the future. But for sure, I think we can all resonate that technology for sure has shaped not just the broader culture, but specifically the students. And so, what role has tech played in shaping the lives of your students?
If anything, for me, I think that tech is almost too prevalent. I recognize that technology has its very like helpful usefulness, but I do find that most students turn to technology more as a crutch than as a resource, or that it occupies a sense of boredom versus like actually being used to connect with persons for something more meaningful and not just functional, like, hey, can you send me your answers to this week's homework?
Sure.
Or can you send me the link to download this or that, right? That might not even be actually school or church related. Um, and in the process, I think that technology has kind of encouraged brain rot of different ways, as the kids would say, right? Is just causing this deterioration of like your ability to think critically or to exercise self-control or to see something again as a resource versus as just something to occupy your time. And if that's the case, like are our students, as we've been told, too busy, or they're not busy enough, or it's just that
Oh,
we've just not really done well to model and to exercise rest and self-control, right? So I think technology in general is great when you are able to use it in its really well-intended purposes. Even thinking about social media, like kids are on social media, but honestly, if I had a choice, I don't want it anymore. I've been on social media for over 20 years and I don't want it anymore. But this
sure,
is where
sure.
kids are at. So how can I connect with kids unless they all have phones, but they don't?
Do you find, okay, so before I ask this question, define for our listeners the term you just used in passing, brain rot. That's fairly new. Again, if we were recording this 10 years ago, probably no clue what that in the world that was. Can
Yeah.
you define that one for us?
So brain rot is really just the outcome of spending too much time online. That was something, admittedly, that I read on the resource Axis
Oh,
Culture Translator, Axis as an AXIS. And you can subscribe to their weekly online newsletter that they will just email you. And it gives you a rundown of like what's popular this week among teens. What does this mean? How does this look? It also has really great discussion questions that you could propose to your teens because
yeah.
I think the reality is, and this is something that maybe we encountered in our own years of youth ministry, is like slang terms that are morphed from original, like proper English terms that you just reinterpret how they mean because of Urban Dictionary, right? I don't even know if people use Urban Dictionary anymore, but brain rot is kind of like a similar sense of saying like, oh, that's so fire or that's hot, as Paris Hilton would have said maybe 20 years ago, right? Um,
They don't know who Paris Hilton is
they
anymore, right?
probably don't, except they maybe have seen that video where she's, talking in a courtroom and complimenting someone's sweater or vest, and then she goes straight into businesswoman mode. So, anyways, needless to say, I think just the basis of brain rot is you spend too much time online and you're consuming very low quality content, but it's like doom scrolling, and you just feel
Yeah.
like, what did I just do? And it's 3 hours past.
Do you guys, Huey, do you think it's worse now? I mean, I know the moment I ask that and the moment we give whatever answer, we're just the old people, kind of just right? Like, oh gosh, look at these guys. But like, I mean, honestly, has it gotten worse? And then for you, for where you're at, is there a trend? Like, was there a trend with your students from middle school to high school, years 1 to 5, and then years wherever you're at now?
Um, I mean, I do think with, technology and all that stuff, I feel like distractions are far more constant, which
Mhm.
I think feeds the brain rot, right? I mean, I see it in my own kids where, they could be on their screen for 45 minutes to an hour, and then when they're off, they're just cranky and lethargic.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the brain rot, right? But I think also in maybe a little bit more broader is um, I think students are far more distracted than well, I want to say because the information and entertainment is so easily accessible. It's
Mhm.
right on their fingertips that it's almost to me it's wild that my kids are growing up in a world where they don't know a day without like smartphones or being connected to the internet.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Like that's to me, I think that still kind of jars me a little bit that they don't know a world without them,
Yeah.
So I do think they're far more distracted. I also do think information can come so easily that our students don't really need to like fight for
Yeah.
fight to like mine spiritual things. Like it's they could get, 5 different viewpoints on something so easily that they don't have to kind of wrestle with what they're reading or what they're thinking about. And also even just like when it comes to like biblical literacy, right? Like their Bible can be on their phones or on their tablets, and they just have to click, 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 and they're there in the book of Ephesians, right? But when you give them a physical Bible and you ask them to turn to the book of James,
Like, where
they
is
don't know
this?
whether that's in the Old Testament or the New Testament. You know,
Yeah.
or like, so I think those are some of the challenges that I had kind of encountered over, especially the last maybe 5, 6 years.
Man, that's so good just to think about how the physical pages of a Bible have now been replaced with scrolls and swipes and search bars, right? And I wonder, right? I think it's not just youth ministry or even in Asian American youth ministry. I think it's just everyone in general. Because I think there's something about wisdom literature in scripture where it was never supposed to just kind of be like, oh, here it is, and just take it. I think it's supposed to be like questioned, thought through. I think they're supposed to ponder it. The purpose of the parables. I think they're supposed to kind of go, hey, hold on, let's pause real quick. Let's peel back the layers. But because we're in such a huge, quick, microwavable theology, right? Like it's so instant that we forget even the principle of patience and processing. And so,
And like, and I'm sure I want to assume that this is not just Asian American youth ministry, but I think students now, and I see it in my own context, is they're terrified of silence.
Yeah.
Right? They're constantly entertained, and I have had students share that because of kind of like YouTube or TikTok or Instagram or Snapchat, whatever, they can't fall asleep without looking at it, without scrolling. And sometimes they stay up through the night, and they don't rest.
yeah.
And I just think they're terrified of silence.
Yeah. And I wonder if that's something for us as ministers to keep in mind as we think through discipleship with our students, right? What does Sabbath rest kind of even look like, or disconnecting from stuff in order to connect to the one true God? So, man, those are some great thoughts. I know we mentioned some challenges already in these things in terms of distractions and kind of the downward trends, but let me ask it with a twist. Dorothy, I'll give you this one first. What are some challenges back then when you first started that you think has actually gotten easier today? Like there were challenges when you first started out, and then now you're like, huh, okay, I think we've put some pretty good progress to these things.
I would say one very basic thing is I've had to address fewer behavioral issues.
Uh,
I'm not sure why that is. I could suspect that in part, like in the Asian culture,
Incentives.
there are, incentives to behavior modification. But on the other hand, I wonder if their outward compliance could be compensatory or even just it's a facade for something else, right? But I still notice that well, granted, I should preface, I used to minister in a Chinatown urban setting. So here now, as I'm in the DC metropolitan, which is very much of like a suburban area, I deal with fewer behavioral issues, partially because the parents are usually at home more often to oversee children or kids and their activities, whereas in a Chinatown context, it was the parents who were watching their grandkids with their eyes closed, or the TV was really just running half the time,
Yeah.
or the kids were much more independent, and so they didn't really have to submit themselves to much authority outside of their grandparents, who probably didn't exert that much authority except come eat.
Yeah.
So I would say just I don't have to like call kids out for like not doing things, but I really wonder in a positive sense still, like what's going on in their heart that they actually would want to participate, or what's going on in their heart that they wouldn't want to participate, but they still do it anyways. But yeah, that's just one thing I've noticed in a positive sense. Like before years past, kids sometimes were just really like they would give you so much lip and not respect you, or they would not respect me, excuse me. I don't know if it's because I'm not trying to say this sarcastically, but because I'm a woman, or because I was too close in age with them, or because maybe I was their parents' friends. So they just saw me in a very nonchalant, casual relationship type of role versus like I'm your youth worker or I'm your youth pastor kind of a sense. So that's just one
Yeah.
thing I've
No, that's good. Hugh, do you see the same thing? I mean, like, I feel like we kind of see this where parents actually are more engaged than before. I mean,
sometimes a little much.
too much.
I appreciate their vigilance, but sometimes can be borderline like supplanting the efforts that kids would need to make for their own spiritual lives.
Yeah. I think that's a good point too. Yeah. Huey, do you see anything like that with parents and trends and those type of challenges that have gotten better?
Yeah, I mean, with parents, I do really sense, and I've had multiple conversations with parents that actually care about the spiritual lives of their children. I think,
Yes. Yeah.
when I was growing up, the bar was so low, right? As long as you go to church,
Yeah.
you don't cause trouble, and you come home, like that's a win.
Yeah.
But now I'm kind of in that space now. In my 40s, I have two children that are in youth ministry, and I have other parents like in my age group that, yes, like school is important, and getting into a good college is important, and having good friends all that is still very important, but they actually do care about the spiritual lives and the salvation of their children and their growth. So I think that's been just such a neat and rewarding experience in this season. Just being able to walk with parents and be a parent myself as we're learning how to parent our children
Yeah.
spiritually. So that's been pretty neat.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think that ties into technology, some of the benefits that Dorothy was talking about, where, I mean, when I was in youth group, there was no resources whatsoever. Like you would have your church, your youth group, and that's all you would know. And then the internet broke in, and then all of a sudden you're able to podcast and connect. And then all of a sudden you're just like, oh my gosh, there's actually Christians who are both theologically deep, but also culturally relevant, and then serious about discipleship. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's how you do it. Because sometimes there was just no good models in your little circle. And so I
Hmm.
don't know.
Speaking on that as well, what it reminded me of when you said like podcasts and resources and internet is even thinking about the proliferation of Christian contemporary music that occurred in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
And at this point, and this is something that I'm gonna, be chatting about with even another colleague, is even the over commercialization of Christian music to the point that kids are on Spotify, and if they had a choice to listen to like K-pop versus like something else that could be what they sing in church, they're probably going to listen to K-pop, right? I think that there's just so many options. They are just trying to settle for whatever feels most comfortable. And
Yeah.
um, something that I've noticed is there are far fewer like student worship team kids in our midst, even more so who even have a desire or conviction to grow into a sense of like being a worship leader.
No.
And so I know that that's not something I would want to aspire for all of my students, but the fact is like there's not a lot of desire among students in general to participate in worship team or to become in the trajectory of a worship leader or something of that nature. So I think maybe this is a regional difference, just that my kids despise being in the spotlight and they don't want to be in a position that they probably will just receive feedback or criticisms of any sort.
Yeah.
And granted, I think a lot of them do struggle with perfectionism. So being in a place of leadership, let alone that requires them or has them being very visible, it's not the most desirous thing. And they probably have stage fright or social anxiety of nature. So needless to say, the Lord can redeem them in a number of ways, but I've just seen how there are far fewer students in worship ministry for whatever reasons, where that was not necessarily the case 10, 15 years ago.
And I wonder if it's a combo of being overly busy.
Also true.
I think, yeah, this spotlight thing, I mean, that's huge. That's a whole nother topic. And I think this is fun because we're talking about over the years and trends. And so a lot of us have been doing this for a long time. The question is, are there any traditions in your youth ministry that you've seen, that you've been part of, or you created that have been awesome, that you personally really like to be part of? And then what is it and why? So Huey, I'll lead off with you.
I can't say this is a tradition, but this is a practice that I've kind of invested into the last year and a half or so. And I call it just kind of a very simple term. I call it the pre-service prayer huddle. Very, very, yeah, not like it's not grandiose or anything like that. But basically before, like 15 minutes before our youth service, I just gather our youth leaders, our parents, and our student leaders, and we just spend just literally 5 to 7 minutes just preparing for the service, praying for the students, praying for the parents, praying for our leaders. Just really quick, 5 to 7, just huddle everybody up just to pray. And I realized like it hits multiple values that I really appreciate, that I've kind of gleaned from even Rooted, is this idea of parent partnership, intergenerational integration. Just do these two things, just giving a sense to our students that youth ministry is not everything. They are a part of a wider church that's displayed and expressed by the leaders being there, by the parents being there, that they are connected to the wider church. It's such a low hanging fruit, right?
Yeah.
It's small that we do on a weekly basis, but it's something that I really, really love. And it's like a moment where I get to sit with a handful of parents just to kind of let them know, hey, this is the message or the message I'll be preaching on today. And if you could just pray for us and pray for our service, and just inviting them to share in the burden and the responsibility of ministry.
Yeah, that's good. It's awesome.
That's something that I really enjoyed this past year.
Yeah. Was that easy to kind of launch, or did that need to kind of build up some steam?
It was easy to launch because I didn't expect like all the parents to come. I didn't expect all the students to all the leaders to come. It was such a low-hanging fruit. Whoever can come just 15 minutes early before service just to pray. If I had like 3 or 4 people, for me, that would have been a win.
That's awesome.
So I had the kind of very low expectations, but just to be present with the people that are there. So that was really awesome for me.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Dorothy, what about you?
I'm kind of taking this in the opposite direction of Huey, which Huey in general, I do want to comment that something I really admire about the Korean church and Korean American church is that there is such a priority of prayer. And that's where the leadership of my church has been trying to move in a more intercessory direction. But I think that we have become very good at following our own systems and being capable that even when we have opportunities to pray, it's not always a default option. So thank you for modeling that and including that in your ministry. And you're really doing a great service to your students by inviting them into that opportunity. So in the opposite way, I would say that I've been trying to excise events and gathering options from the youth calendar that don't or that are not as in alignment with the vision and with the mission of the church, as well as trying to combat the mentality that there, quote unquote, always has to be something for the youth. Because in an Asian American context, to say that means it doesn't matter what they do as long as they go somewhere because the parents need to have cell group. I think that I'm trying to reverse the verbiage and the understanding that the kids or youth ministry is just a drop-off ministry.
That's good.
And we just want them to be out of mind, out of sight until we take them home. But rather, I think that it's important, similar to what Huey said about, rooted in intergenerational integration, is I want to invite the partnership of parents so that they can be the spiritual leaders of their homes and invest in the spiritual lives of their students. And so in a sense, for the sustainability of my church's youth ministry, we've been trying to take things away from the calendar or from general like over programmatic activities rather than to add to it, because we do believe that it is more important for families to spend time together. And if they cannot build in their own rest, then we have to build that into our schedule. So that's just been something that my team and I has really focused on, because most of my coworkers, my youth volunteers have been serving for at least like anywhere between 8 to 15 years.
Yeah.
So I value their spiritual health and their rest as much as I would for a student. Similarly, I'm not trying to make the kids more busy. If anything, I'm helping to provide some resources for families or links and devotionals where they can either do that on their own or together, or give them back space to be intentional with each other versus expecting the youth ministry to organize everything affiliated hangout or activity or gathering. And I think that that's become in some ways unnecessary. And I would like to help inculcate the culture of like caring for each other back into the
Yeah.
church, versus the church is the only entity that can care for people.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good, Dorothy. Thanks for sharing that.
Mm.
Man, I think for us over here, one thing that we try to do kind of towards the back half of the summer,
Mm.
we want to help the youth see that the gospel ministry happens. It needs to happen even outside its doors, within this local kind of region. And so one event that we kind of do, I think you guys seen it on our social media. It's called Java Jam.
Yeah.
And so kind of we host, we try to use the language of, hey, we're going to host a huge block party for the neighborhood. And what we'll mainly try to get in partnership is a lot of the beverage and hospitality, like the restaurants kind of in the area. And so we want to help the students kind of go into the city and to say, hey, these people that you go frequently dine at, like they're in not only in need of the gospel, but they're part of our community. And so we just need to go in asking, hey, what can we do for you guys as a church? And so we try to challenge them. Hey, like if our neighbors don't know who we are, or they don't know what we're all about, then we've done kind of a poor job being kind of in this kind of community where God has placed us. And so we kind of use this event to really push the students to talk to management, to talk to owners of restaurants and, drink places, so that they can kind of start getting used to being missional in this way. And so we love it. We give a lot of ownership to the students. It helps them with talking to humans more and more. And I think, man, that's why we're here a lot of times, right? I know we have a gazillion things we can talk through, especially when it comes to trends, challenges, opportunities. We'd love to hear from you guys. What are some things that you guys see in these categories? But for now, we're just going to say thank you guys for listening to us today, to the Rooted Asian American Youth Ministry Roundtable. We look forward to next time. And then until then, may the power of the gospel uphold us, carry us through as we trust in the gospel and its power for ministry in our lives. And so be sure to follow us at Rooted Ministry on Instagram. And so thank you guys for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Asian American Youth Ministry Roundtable, part of the Rooted family of podcasts. You can go even deeper into gospel-centered, Bible-saturated youth ministry by listening to our other podcasts, including the Rooted Youth Ministry Podcast and the Rooted Parent Podcast. Find them all at rootedministry.com.
We are so excited to share that we have a new opportunity for folks working in family ministry. The Rooted Family Ministry Mentorship Program. It provides both small group and individual coaching for volunteers, youth pastors, or associate pastors who oversee family ministry in their church context. This 12-month program includes small groups of 6 to 8 led by one mentor in both a cohort and an individual setting through a carefully crafted curriculum designed to help you grow spiritually as an individual and as a leader in your congregation. At the end of the program, we expect you'll be prepared to equip the volunteers and parents in your congregation to disciple the next generation to know and love Jesus. Additionally, when you complete the program, you'll receive a Rooted Family Ministry certificate to affirm your commitment to join God in the work He is doing in the lives of the families you serve.